I mean, we've done research here at the NCF about young people's ideas about communism, or indeed their knowledge, even just their knowledge, and it was sort of lamentable, really. What is the problem, as you see it, between the way in which communism is taught, if at all, and other history is taught?
Well, the first problem with history overall is that only 45% of young people actually do it for GCSE at all.
Right.
So we're talking about ignorance of history altogether. We're trying to create citizens of the future who know very little about the past, which seems to me crazy. The subject has been quite wrongly downgraded in Britain. But even if you do it, and I've got one here, the Nazi experience and the Soviet history are told in completely different ways.
Right.
I think of it as being like the difference between commentating on a football match, right, and a moral view. So when it comes to telling the Nazi story, it's very much a moral view. And I've got here one of the revision and practice books that is available for children to doing GCSE, and it has in its opening pages, in the summary, it's got Germany 1890 to 1945. Perfectly fair subject. These are all perfectly fair subjects. And it's got under it, as one of the main categories, the experiences of Germans under the Nazis, 1933 to 1939. It's got the machinery of terror, and it goes into detail about how people were terrified. They were not allowed to say things, or they'd be arrested or tortured or killed. Their racial policy. So it goes into detail about how the evil and horrible experience that people had under the Nazis. And so you come away from that knowing how bad the Nazis were and how horrible it was for people living under it. And you turn to so that's what I call the moral approach to history. Then you go to the Soviet Union, and it's completely different. It is superpower relations and the Cold War. So it's not about the experience of people in the communist countries. It is the origins of the Cold War crises, the end of the Cold War. It's basically treating the communist bloc and the West as if they were two rival football teams, playing. Sometimes one team played well and the other team played badly. Stalin, scored well with this particular tactic, or did well here or there, or it's like a game. The morality of it is non-existent. The experience of people in the Soviet Union is not mentioned. The experience of people in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, in Poland, Hungary, the Baltic states, who had communism imposed on them, not mentioned. Now, I'm sure that history is taught by some of the best teachers, in my view. I'm prejudiced because I read history, but I think some of the best teachers there are historians. And I don't blame them. What I blame is the focus. The one is focused on the football match approach, and one is on the moral approach.
Well, why would you say there is that difference?
I mean, who knows? I can't say for sure, but I suspect this is because in the academic world generally, certainly among the higher academics in universities, there has been a preponderance of people who have had some sympathy with the left-wing views or extreme left-wing views, and have had no sympathy with Nazi or fascist views. And there's been a disproportionate, and so they are very happy to concentrate on what happened under the Nazis, but they're much less happy going into detail about what happened to people in the Soviet Union and other communist countries. And of course, the biggest number of deaths took place in China, and that is just not not mentioned in this book at all.
In fact, I remember when we were discussing this before we came on, you had some pretty sobering statistics about, for example, the knowledge of Chairman Mao amongst people.
Yes, I mean, this is from your own research, that 70% of young people have never even heard of Chairman Mao. I mean, the ignorance is stunning. And, I do think that it's a failure of our educational system that the man responsible for more deaths personally in the 20th century than anybody else is unheard of. Extraordinary failure. And then at the same time, there is a bit of a sympathy for communism, because another recent poll showed that 38% of young adults, a bit older than the cohort you looked at, think that communism could have worked if done better.
Isn't that one of the oldest ones in the book, that they always use that as a cop-out? I mean, in discussions you've had, or political arguments we've all had, that yes, you're quite right, it was terrible, but that's because it wasn't done properly.
Yes, but what makes it even more extraordinary to me is that you have 70% have never heard of Chairman Mao, but 38% say that communism could have worked if it were done better. Now, they're combining, there is an overlap there of people who haven't heard of Chairman Mao and think communism could have worked. So they combine historical ignorance of an extraordinary extent, and with believing it could have worked. Now, I try to avoid propaganda as such, because I think it's unnecessary and counterproductive. I just want young people, to know the facts, to know the history, to know the story. Then they can make up their own mind. If they still think, after studying the over 20 times that communist regimes have been attempted, they still think that it could work with a tweak here, or they're cleverer than Lenin or cleverer than Mao, then fine. Let them make that decision. But let them at least know the story before they draw conclusions that without any foundation of knowledge.